The Sleepers, Part 4, Jane. Chapter 29, The American Dream.
3 portraits hung on the classroom's front wall, welcoming Jane's students to their first day of U.S. history. Painstaking summer planning went into this lesson and the semester ahead. State testing went well last year, but she was still going to experiment. Standardized tests be damned. She didn't have to standardize her teaching. The faculty happily repeated the same material year after year. For Jane, each year was a new challenge to do better. Perhaps, with the right context, she could lift these sleepers beyond what grades could ever show. She would lift them out of their misery and give them life. 28 empty desks, all in perfect rows, stared at her. She'd been asked to relocate classrooms again this year and just finished transplanting the decorations. Jane cared little for perfect order, but she wanted a place of learning, not a white-walled sanitarium. Students filed in before the first bell, shuffling to the chairs of their liking. The start of a new year was always awkward. Teacher and students stared at each other, not knowing what to expect. Small talk seemed inappropriate between strangers. She let the moments pass as the tardy students claimed the dreaded front row. When the pledge started, she almost cursed, having forgotten to turn off the speaker. There would be no sad sleeper pledge on her watch. Jane wore her standard issue scrubs in the sleeper school colors of dark gray with yellow trim. They did little for her full figure, and she hated that it screamed assimilation. But the principle was clear, with no exceptions on the teacher uniform. Her brown hair was up in a loose bun. She wanted to see the kids, not spend all day fighting her hair. Everyone looked tired. They always looked tired, even on day one. She complained silently, frustrated by something everyone told her she couldn't change. It was time to try something new. "Students, I'm Teacher Jane." She held up her hand, a mock sign of protesting any resistance at her name choice. "First names are fine, so just Teacher Jane. Today we are going to start a little different in this class and all year long. We'll get to all those pesky rules and attendance and learning names, but first, a question. Does anyone know what these 3 individuals have in common?" Jane moved to the side and motioned to the 3 pictures behind her. One kid groaned, surprised to find he would have to work on the first day of school. "Holidays are over. Anyone? Don't be shy. I'll start calling on you soon enough." "They're all dead," joked a kid in the back. The classroom muffled laughter, afraid of how their new teacher would respond to the self-appointed class clown. Jane smiled, always a sucker for someone with spirit. "That's definitely true. And your name?" "Name's Caden." "Thank you, Caden, for getting us started." Social bravery among sleepers was rare. She dared not crush the students by scolding on day one. Such damage could be irreparable. The class breathed relief that she let the comment slide. "Anyone else?" Silence. She would crack their shells in time. In such moments, her mentor taught her to always ask the quietest student first. The clear target sat front and center, late to class, but definitely not from socialization in the hall. The girl was an obvious victim of too much sleep in her schedule. "What's your name?" Jane stopped herself from calling this child sweetie. The school board preferred clear first names and only ambiguous pronouns to any accidental nicknames. The girl lowered her head, caught off guard by the direct question, and answered quietly, "Jessie, Teacher Jane." "All right, Jessie, what do you think these 3 have in common?" Are they all presidents?" "Good guess, Jessie. That one is a president. Anyone know his name?" A spry arm shot up, a sign the classroom was relaxing. "That's Abraham Lincoln." "Correct. And your name?" "Ada." "Thank you, Ada. Does anyone know the other 2? Jane would have to move on with the lesson soon, but she wanted the class to feel safe to make mistakes and share. No one replied after 20 dull seconds. "This is Andrew Carnegie, and this is Sonia Sotomayor." The class unanimously replied, "Oh," but no one comprehended the connection. This was fine. She didn't expect history superstars. This was a place of learning, not a place for the learned. Each of these three represents the American dream. Do any of you know what that means? A shy boy in the middle of the room glanced side to side, hoping his teacher wouldn't notice his obvious aversion to attention. Jane made deadly eye contact and asked, "What do you think is meant by the American dream?" He responded cautiously, "My dad says we are living the American dream." Here was hope. Perhaps parents did teach their children. "Great! Can you elaborate? Do you know what your dad means?" The student shuffled insecurely, but continued. "He says it means we are safe, that by being sleepers, we are free from failure." She wanted to lower her head. Disappointment deflated her hope. Here was another child ruined by sleep and parents. But he was willing to speak, and he listened. She could mold this clay. Perhaps there was still hope. She had to be careful. "And what's your name?" "I'm Jason." "Thank you, Jason, for sharing." She had to ignore Jason or delicately correct him. Sleepers would never escape their peril if they believed as Jason's father. Our objective this year is to study the American dream and what it means for individuals like those on this wall. I want you to feel the strength of this country, our vitality, the stuff that makes us incredible. Eyes started again to lose focus. Time to turn on her engaging voice. She clapped her hands to give a wake-up signal, and then walked the rows to the back of the class. They turned backwards and like clockwork were re-engaged. Each of these individuals started from humble beginnings. They were at the bottom of the economic totem pole and rose to the top in their profession. You probably know the most about President Lincoln. Raised in a log cabin on the frontier, self-educated, famous orator, freed the slaves. Sound familiar? She nodded to the class, hoping to spark their memory and arouse engagement. Class members nodded back like bouncing sheep. Then let me tell you about Sonia Sotomayor, or more correctly, Justice Sotomayor. She was born from Puerto Rican immigrants and raised in the Bronx, the famously rough part of New York City. Sound familiar to anyone here? A few nods from students now perking up. If anyone could relate to tough circumstances, it should have been these kids. This school was one of the poorest in the district. Sonia fought in school to achieve top grades, making her way to Princeton and then Yale, where she studied law. No one seemed impressed. Don't take anything for granted. Those are the best schools in the nation. And she started at a place like ours, a place outsiders would say meant little chance for success. Ultimately, she was appointed by President Obama to the Supreme Court, the first Hispanic woman raised to that honor. Justice Sotomayor opposed every sleep age reduction proposed during her ailing tenure. Often, she was the only dissenting vote. In other words, class, she stood against 10 other judges, her beliefs her only ally, arguing that children should not be sleepers. She should be your hero. Whether you know it or not, she was fighting for you. Jane pointed to the students, and more ears perked up. Finding history might actually be important. Jane moved to the front of the class, having locked their attention. Listen to this one. Andrew Carnegie immigrated as a young teenager to the U.S. in 1848. One of his first jobs was as a telegraph messenger. Imagine instead of transmitting important news, someone hand-delivered everything for you. That's Andrew. He worked hard, made wise investments, and started successful companies, building the biggest steel empire in the U.S. When he sold his company, he was the richest man in America. He had done it. From nothing, he had gained everything. To many folks, this meant he had achieved the American dream. But you know what we remember him for today? Philanthropy, the art of donations. He gave his fortune away, established universities, libraries, museums, you name it. Not even Gates or Zuckerberg competed with his donations for the future. A few students clearly pondered those riches and what it would be like to give it away. From such heroes, we learn that the American dream doesn't mean the freedom from failure. It means the freedom to fail. She paused to look at Jason and gauge his response, hoping he would forgive her a necessary correction. We tend to forget the meaning of the dream or ruin it to match our current hip trends. When your grandparents... She looked around and reassessed. Maybe your great-grandparents were young. They thought the American dream meant having everything. She gestured her hands holding the world. Anything you want. Sounds pretty nice, huh? More nods. Well, the richest man of his era did not gain everything for nothing. America is the land of opportunity, a land where a young person like yourselves, can change the future. But you can't skip the cost. Carnegie, a poor Scotsman, became the greatest industrialist, but he had to put his time in at the telegraph office. Sotomayor studied her brains out to do well at school and make a difference. They could have failed, and I mean failed hard. They could have ended up back on the street. Many like them, like us, do and will fail. Lincoln could have died an obscure death as a farmer or lost that critical election. But they didn't fail, and so we honor them. Deep down, we should feel proud of our American heritage. We should feel hope that we too may rise up out of our misery and make such a difference. Jane could tell the majority of the class was thinking, but they didn't see it yet. There had to be a way to teach this subject without jamming it down their throats. She sat on her desk, resting her feet and giving her a second to think. Perhaps another question. But she hated fishing for answers. She could do better. The right idea came to mind. Class, think to yourself, what was it like learning to ride a bike? Jane allowed a moment for contemplation. Can anyone describe that experience to the class? Ada shot her hand up again. One in every class. She called on another student instead, a messy-haired boy in the back. What's your name? Hector. All right, Hector, tell me about learning to ride a bike. I'm awesome on my bike. He looked around expecting applause from the class. Everyone chuckled, even Jane. Okay, but tell me about learning to ride. Hector straightened up, proud of his experience. My mom actually made me learn. Said I was too old not to know how to bike. I would be 8 soon enough, and she wanted me to know so I could deliver my sleep if needed. She forced me on that bike. It was pretty tough. I fell a lot. He seemed to lose some of his bravado, nervous he would be judged by his classmates. That's great. Tell me more. No one ever rode a bike perfectly the first time. Tell us about your crashes. He laughed, remembering some cherished moment. Well, I fell some with my mom holding the seat to keep it steady. Finally, she sent me on my own, coasting downhill. I rode straight for a drain and couldn't turn in time. My wheel jammed between the metal grates, and I flipped right over the bars. Flew like Superman, and I cried like a little baby. The class roared. So, did you quit? No, of course not. Why not? 'Cause I was going to prove I could do it. No bike was going to beat me, and I needed wheels. Last question, Hector. How did you feel having learned to ride? Satisfaction swept his countenance. I felt really good. He nodded smugly. Many in the class nostalgically made the same faces, remembering their own learning. Jane again stood and smiled proudly, having found her answer by metaphor. Thank you, Hector. You have made my point perfectly. You have demonstrated the meaning of the American dream. It is not about protection, and it is not about having everything. It is about trying at something till you get it. It is about having the freedom to try. People come to America to try. Maybe you want to be the president, a judge, or an entrepreneur. Go for it. I wanted to be a teacher. No one locked me into a destiny. I pursued teaching, and I'm going to try to make a difference as best as I can here. That's me, living the American dream. And it starts today. Some of you will get A's in the class, a few might get F's. Either way, you will earn your grade. I could pass you all and never expect you to work, but that would cheat you out of this experience and the chance to prepare for grown-up life. You see, like the bike, you have to work in this world, and you will be rewarded for your work. Sacrifice today prepares us for something better. Who knows? You might be the next president, but you can't skip the step of sacrifice. The bell tolled, and students moved loudly to tidy their backpacks and depart, but Jane wasn't finished. Hang on, class. She held up one finger in delay. I mean what I say. I'm going to teach you this year that such great change is possible for you too. The American dream is not dead, not even for sleepers. Trial, faith, and sacrifice make it possible. Be ready. We're going to have a great year. Jane almost had to yell as the kids were leaving, but she had to let them know. This was going to be a fantastic year. With the classroom empty, Jane sighed again and shook her head. The only student familiar with the American dream thought it was about security. She had had enough of that security. Americans had forgotten the meaning of sacrifice, the input into having the dream. And it wasn't just sleepers. Clients, sleepers, even her fellow independents. They had all forgotten. Borrowed sleep, the real enemy, delivered tragic poison to the American dream. With its right hand, it gave employment and stability. With its left hand, it stole all hope. It squashed the antecedents to the dream. There is no upward mobility as a sleeper, no chance for the telegrapher to become the tycoon. Carnegie would still be sleeping. Sotomayor would die in the Bronx. Minus a few lucky lucid dreamers, there is no value to life, no reward for hard work. There is no way to sacrifice. You sleep and you earn money. There is no knowledge or skill increase. You sleep again and again and again. The American dream died. The government issued the handouts, and Sleep Free linked the prison chains. She had to bring it back, even if just for a few. She wanted to scream in her empty classroom. She moved to her desk and started to fidget with an invitation embroidered with Sleep Free's logo. It represented both the chance of a lifetime and annihilation. They wanted to imprison her too. Jane's appointment with Sleep Free was next week. She had ignored the texts, the suspicious emails, the phone calls, even the fancy invitation hand-delivered by Amazon. Finally, she took the last call, planning to shout, "Go away!" But the man on the other line was very, very convincing. He begged for just a short interview, just a smidgen of time to meet in person and wrap up the details for her award. He spelled out the large donation Sleep Free would make to her school. He lured her in bit by bit, and so she spat on her principles and agreed to meet. What would one meeting, one measly award from Sleep Free mean? It couldn't ruin her. It wouldn't. She was fighting the fight, living the dream, and maybe she might educate the destroyer.